One of the most important aspects of an election are swing states, states that can swing either way, deciding the fate of the next American president. But one state caught the attention of the country during the 2020 election, Florida, the nation's largest battleground. Dr. Kaya Hummel, a political science professor at the University of Miami, says Republicans and Democrats fight to win over the diverse Latinx voters.
Florida doesn't have a Latino vote. Florida has a Cuban vote, a Venezuelan vote, a Puerto Rican vote. And as many Floridians know, there's not just that. There's the third-generation Cuban vote, the first-generation Cuban vote, the younger Venezuelan vote, the older Venezuelan vote, the Puerto Ricans who resettled in Orlando vote versus the Puerto Ricans that resettled in Miami.
While many thought Biden had an edge in the state, Florida ended up swinging red in the 2020 election, giving Trump 29 electoral votes for the second time. But what went wrong for the Democrats, causing Florida to ride a red wave for the second election in a row? Hummel says both parties used targeted campaign messages.
The Trump campaign targeted white and Latino communities around the country with fear-based messaging. And we know from political science research that fear-based political messages work really well. On the other hand, the Biden campaign used a build back better. Through unity, we can create a better world. And that's a laudable approach, but it is much more difficult to mobilize people.
One powerful narrative that swung the state in this election was Trump's socialism rhetoric against Democrats. UN political science professor Michael Touchton says this didn't sit well with the 40% Latin population.
This messaging worked quite well to sway mostly Cuban American and Venezuelan American Latino voters in South Florida to vote for Trump. And their experience with the Maduro regime and Chavez before him is enough that if you say socialism enough and associate it with any party, they will vote in the opposite direction. This is interesting too, because the Cuban American population had been trending more for the Democrats, at least in the younger generations. And that has shifted in favor of Republicans, partially because of the consistent messaging on socialism. Now, the Biden campaign did a really poor job in addressing that message and countering it.
America will never be socialista.
With socialism comes race, another significant subject that pushed voters right. Eugenia Quintilla, a PhD candidate in political science at the University of Michigan, says race is a complex experience for voters, especially for the Florida Latins who Democrats failed to win over.
A number of Latino voters who are motivated or galvanized by Trump's rhetoric on race and on national unity. We cannot overstate enough the importance of how much authoritarianism or a strong man really appeals to a lot of voters across many communities, but especially in the Latino community. Because you have one party that's not acknowledging any sort of history of systemic racism. And if you don't think that systemic racism is real, and many people have this view, of course, something like Black Lives Matter is going to seem frivolous, or it's going to seem like, like a terrorist organization.
UN political science professor Gregory Koger says Florida will continue to bleed red.
Donald Trump won Florida in 2016, and the Republicans won the two major statewide contests in 2018, and now Trump won again in Florida. So I think we have to take seriously the notion that until Democrats fundamentally change the way that they organize and turn out and persuade in the state of Florida that this is a red state. Republicans have demonstrated a superior ability to win elections in this state, and they'll continue to do so unless the Democratic Party really gets its act together.
However, Hummel says it's not over for the Democrats in Florida.
It's a swing state in the sense that, well, it's gone red in the last two elections. Those were by less than 1% or 3 percentage points. That's not a red wall. That is a reversible trend.
She says both parties have learned who they need to win over to obtain Florida's 29 electoral votes.
One thing that we saw in this election is that neither party can take Latinx voters for granted.
Even without Florida's approval, CNN projected Joe Biden as the president-elect of the United States with 306 electoral votes.
Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected.
In order for Florida to recover their blue votes, they'll have to amplify campaigning efforts targeted towards Latinx voters in hopes to flip some seats in the 2022 congressional election. From UMTV, I'm Serena Nunes.